Council Information Center, Andriy Lysenko, Colonel.
The President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, has had a meeting with the heads of law enforcement and armed forces about the situation in Donbass, during which they have discussed the implementation of the tasks in the anti-terrorist operation and defined the events that have to provide for the fulfillment of Minsk agreements about the day of silence that has to start on the 9th of December. The head of state has paid special attention to the improvement of delivery of arms and to the armed forces and the release of hostages from captivity. The head of the OSCE, Didier Buchhalter, welcomed the preparedness of Ukraine's leadership to provide for the Day of Silence. The International Day of Volunteers has been marked today, and Petro Poroshenko has bestowed state awards to Ukrainian volunteers for their civic courage and hefty personal contribution to the development of volunteer movement. 12 volunteers were awarded with their personal firearms. Over the last 24 hours, the situation in the anti-terrorist operation zone remained stably complicated. The Russian mercenaries have launched 3 powerful attempts to break through the defense of the Ukrainian military. 2 enemy's attacks were repelled in the north of the anti-terrorist operation zone, next to the settlement Sokilniki. The enemy has sustained heavy losses in personnel and armored vehicles. After the artillery fire, the attempt of the breakthrough by the terrorists next to the settlement of Opitne was repelled. The enemy sustained significant losses and was made to retreat. Both old and new terminals of the Donetsk airport are under the control of the Ukrainian military. In order to avoid the concentrated mass hits against the terminals, there was a decision taken about maneuver of our groups. After the massive artillery fire ended, the Ukrainian military returned to Donetsk airport and repelled all the attempts to seize the airport. It is under the control of Ukrainian military. The Russian side continues to move additional formations of mercenaries, firearms, military machinery, and ammunition to the territory temporarily controlled by the militants. Over the last 24 hours, there was an information about the movement of 3 convoys of armed machinery from Russia, numbering 200 vehicles. Yesterday at 8 a.m. from Russia through the Dubrovka village, a convoy of trucks numbering 150 went at 12:10 p.m. Another convoy, 10 gas cisterns and 6 armored vehicles. And yesterday to tonight, 40 trucks were going in the direction of Luhansk. In Donetsk, the terrorists have shelled the positions of the anti-terrorist operation in the village Pisky from multiple rocket launchers Grad. In the Baltsevo direction next to the village of Ridkodub, they also shelled our positions from Grad launchers and from mortars and grenade launchers next to Debaltsevo, Vuglягірськ, Орлово, Іванівка, Нікішино, Майорське. In the south of the anti-terrorist operation zone, they fired at the positions of Ukrainian military next to Novolaspa, Granitne, Chermalik, Bogdanivka, Olginka, Novotroitska. In Luhansk direction, our positions were shelled next to the city Stanitsa Luhanska, next to villages Staraya Dar and Vilhov, Shastia and Verkhnya Vilhovka, and along the Bakhmutivka highway, our road checkpoints next to villages of Nizhny and Krymsky were shelled. In all such cases, our artillery delivers blows in response on condition that there's no danger for peaceful residents. Over the last 24 hours, 6 Ukrainian military were killed and 13 got wounded. The drones flights were detected in the vicinity of Stary Aidar and Raigorodka in Luhansk region and next to Yalta, which is not far from Mariupol. The Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Poland condemns the violence on the territory controlled by terrorists. This is said in the statement published by the Polish Foreign Ministry because of the death in Donetsk of a citizen of Poland. On the 1st of December, a citizen of Poland who's been living in Donetsk since 1980s had a car crash with a car of militants. There was an altercation, as a result of which the militants shot the Pole. He was taken to the hospital but died because of the wounds. We regard this event as a next act of anarchy and violence, the Foreign Ministry of Poland says. Yesterday at 8:30 p.m., the State Auto Inspection Service has found 4 hand anti-tank grenade launchers in a private car, and the driver and the passenger of the car were detained.
Counterintelligence SBU arrested 5 supporters of terrorists on the territory of Luhansk and Donetsk regions. 2 of them were informers, and they worked for DNR. Collected and handed information about dislocation, weaponry of Ukrainian armed forces, and they were promised 5,000 hryvnia for that. According to Article 258, Part 3, creation of terrorist organizations, it provides punishment from 8 to 15 years imprisonment. So they earned that sentence. Among arrested, there is a militant who belonged to a illegal military group of Berkut of DNR, and 2 residents from Stakhanov, activists of the Party of Russian Bloc, which was prohibited by Ukrainian court for instigation to disrupt constitutional system and to destroy sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine. So based on that information, they started criminal charges. Artemivsk, in Artem City Council, they collected 500 forms to receive the financial assistance, and they were provided to check humanitarian organization, human in trouble. In Artemivsk, that humanitarian organization provided cards for $300 each to buy winter clothing or footwear, to pay for bills, to buy coal, and they provided those cards to 150 IDPs, from temporarily occupied territories and from ATO area to other regions of Ukraine. 514,000 people moved, including Donetsk and Luhansk region, and 19,000 from Crimea and from Sevastopol, according to the regulation of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. There should be assistance to 145,000 families of IDPs. For IDPs, information can be found on the website of the government. Local authorities are trying to find facilities to receive IDPs, especially for the winter, and they found 1,000 different facilities and belong to the state or to private structures, and it's possible to locate 15,000, about 15,000 people. In Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kharkivsky region, they build in stationary station houses, and they collected they built 37 buildings, and 11 in Kharkiv, and they can receive 376 people in Zaporizhzhia, 9 buildings, and for 384, and in Dnipropetrovsk, Dniprodzerzhinsk, Nikopol, Pavlograd, and Kryvyi Rih, they installed 17 buildings for 688 people. Units of state service on emergency during the last day found and destroyed on 715 explosive devices. Since the beginning of this work, they found 30,160 explosive items, and they checked, and also they examined 960 administrative buildings and more than 1,500 hectares of land. President of Ukraine Petro Poroshenko had a phone conversation with Vice President of the U.S. Joseph Biden, and he informed about the readiness of the U.S. To consider further economic and financial support to Ukraine. They also discussed humanitarian situation in Donbass and the decision of Ukrainian government to stop financing those regions because that money they rob that money and they support terrorism. Also, they considered how to provide humanitarian assistance and how to provide food and first need items, how to provide that to the Donbass region. John Kerry, during his presentation at the meeting of OSCE, he told that Russia continues to provide weapons to the east of Ukraine, and Russian soldiers die in battles against Ukrainian armed forces. So Russia doesn't comply with international commitments and also commitments in the framework of OSCE and documents it signed, he told. Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, Lysenko, he calls OSCE countries to influence on Russia for them to stop threaten neighboring countries. Russian Federation must take away its troops and equipment and to close its border for the movement of borders and mercenaries to be stopped. Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bulgaria, Daniil Mitov, he told her that Bulgaria condemns illegal annexation of Crimea and doesn't recognize illegal elections in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. This disagrees with international law and Minsk agreements. The House of Representatives of the Congress, they may pass a resolution. They condemn Russian Federation and its aggression against neighboring countries focused at political and economic domination. With that resolution, the House of Representatives supports efforts of Poroshenko and Ukrainian people to build peace, and that includes a complete take out of Russian troops from Ukrainian territory, full control over the border, disarmament of separatists and militants, and limitation for opportunities of Russian Federation to use different techniques to interfere into internal affairs of Ukraine. The House of Representatives calls President of the U.S. to give weapons and intelligence to Ukrainian armed forces, and they call to stop all military cooperation with the Russian Federation, and calls President the U.S. to work with cooperate with allies for the illegal annexation of Crimea not to be recognized, and to introduce additional sanctions against Russia and its leadership. Your questions, please. Tell me, please, are you planning next to hold next negotiations in Minsk or somewhere else, and how the peace ceasefire will be achieved since the 9th. Is it planned to have some negotiations between these groups that are responsible for that? As to additional consultations and negotiations, it's not clear where and what will take place. We don't have that information yet. As to the work of the joint group, in order to agree on the ceasefire day, they decided on the 9th of December, just to have time for the representatives of that group to be able to have a meeting and to see the leadership of and gang leaders and to agree on that day. That day will be just a test to understand who and to which extent is ready to comply with Minsk agreements. On that day, it will be clear to which extent militants are ready and terrorists are ready to the ceasefire, and if there is a good coordination of the activities. At least everything that depends on Ukrainian side, everything is done. President ordered to put all the efforts for that day, to have ceasefire and for us to start complying with Minsk agreements. We remember that the first paragraph is ceasefire. And there are no day offs for that, because we have a conflict. We have the war in the east. That's why days off are not days off. Every day is an opportunity to do maximum to establish peace. Thank you very much. And
So earlier than the 9th of December, there won't be any rounds. The term has been defined. We have the 9th of December in sights. What will the day of silence provide? I understood earlier that we need several days of silence to start withdrawing heavy arms. Yes. As soon as there's 24 days of silence and ceasefire, this will be a start to begin fulfilling the other points of Minsk agreements, like the withdrawal of heavy arms with a caliber more than 100 millimeters at the distance of 15 kilometers. This will also open opportunities for release of hostages and their return home, and other points of Minsk agreements, like removal of mine and engineering fields and barriers, the taking control of the state border with the participation of OSCE representatives, and further withdrawal of all the arms and demilitarization. Where have our military died? No details. We have no details. We only have general data. Any other questions? Yeah, there is a question. Will you please comment in more detail about the Donetsk airport? They say that one of the terminals was destroyed altogether. Well, of course, the airport is out of order. There's a lot of destruction there, and the terminals are so much damaged that they cannot perform the functions for which they were created. A lot of destruction, ruination, but those terminals are a sort of a protection barrier for those who hold their defense. As I have already said, our military had to retreat as a maneuver to avoid the heavy artillery shelling, preserve their forces, come back and repel the attacks. But what does this mean if the terminal is ruined? And as far as I understand, you cannot maneuver there. No, you can maneuver, of course. Thank you very much, and the press briefing is over as of